Elk Island National Park. Actually, zooming in from Edmonton, but she is works at the Elk Island National Park as a resource management officer. She has worked in the park for 5 years and with Parks Canada for 7 years. She currently leads the invasive plant management and amphibian monitoring programs for the park, as well as being an active member of the Bison management team during the winter months. So Elk Island is a special place. I was there a few years back, and it's a great opportunity to learn about the park from a person who knows the park probably as good as anybody. So I'd like to again welcome Annelise for our talk, and please take it away.
Yeah, thanks so much. Thanks for having me. Yeah, today I'm going to talk a bit about Elk Island National Park. It's a bit of a hidden gem and a park that, yeah, I've worked at for quite a few years and had the opportunity to kind of dip my toe in a lot of different projects that happen at this park over the years. But as mentioned, currently I lead the invasive plant management and amphibian programs, as well as, yeah, being a big role in the bison management program. So today I'm going to share a bit about the park, its ecosystem, and what my team does, and as well as kind of opportunities that where people can get involved with the park as well. So I'd like to start my presentation similarly with a land acknowledgement. So from where I am zooming to you guys, Edmonton and Elk Island lie in Treaty 6 territory, which is the home of many Indigenous peoples, including the Cree, Saulteaux, Niitsitapi, Blackfoot, Métis, and Nakota Sioux. And I acknowledge the generations of Indigenous peoples who have stewarded this land throughout time and who continue to do so. And I recognize that we are all treaty people and have a responsibility to work towards reconciliation, reconnection, and shared stewardship. So yeah, today I'm going to talk to you a bit about the history of Elk Island National Park, our ecological monitoring programs, our active management programs, which of course include the bison, and then a bit about the opportunities that we offer at the park. So we can't talk about the history of Elk Island without talking about the history of bison in the prairies. So tens of millions of bison used to roam Western North America prior to European colonization. In 1883, a man wrote that he rode a cart for 6 successive days through masses of buffaloes. And I think this picture kind of depicts that idea quite well. And the sound of unseen herds of bison was often described as resembling distant thunder. Indigenous groups of the prairies and bison also have a long and intertwined history. They speak of bison having existed from time immemorial and often refer to them as relatives deserving of great respect. So in the mid-19th century, bison were seen no longer as essential to life on the prairies, but more as an obstacle to settlement by colonists in the area. And by the late 1800s, all but a few bison had been killed, driven by the encouragement of wasteful hunting practices and made possible through the influx of horses and firearms. And American troops in the 1860s and 70s used the killing of bison to starve and forcibly pacify First Nations onto reserves. So Elk Island National Park, or Elk Park, was first established as a federally controlled game preserve in 1906 to protect one of the last remaining herds of elk in the area. And so the original park was a small area around a stone lake, which is one of our main visitor areas in the park, and it has since expanded over time to the 190 kilometers square that the park is today. And actually, it's larger than that. We recently acquired another property on the western side of the park. So it's a bit bigger than the 194 kilometers now. But it is, and it's the only fully fenced national park in Canada. So as those bison numbers declined, some individuals tried to protect them by capturing them and caring for them on private land. And one such herd, which is famously known as the Pablo Allard herd, after the two Métis individuals who took care of it, was grazed on Flathead Reservation land in Montana. So 1 year after the creation of Elk Park, so in 1907, that herd was bought by the Canadian government and brought to Elk Island. And 30 to 40 of those bison formed the basis of what is our bison herd today. And around 80% of plains bison alive today in the world descend from this herd. So it's a pretty important herd that was maintained. And then in 1965, 22 wood bison were moved from one of the last remaining herds in Wood Buffalo National Park to Elk Island National Park in what was called then the isolation area and is now our south part of our park. And they were moved there because there was some worry about disease. Bovine tuberculosis and brucellosis was kind of running rampant in those herds. So those 22 that came, they actually took the 11 calves they have and they were hand reared by park staff in order to get rid of those diseases in the herd. But the park's contribution to conservation goes beyond bison and elk. In 1941, beavers were successfully reintroduced into the park after an absence of 100 years, and they are now thriving. Trumpeter swans were reintroduced in 1987 and fishers in 1990. The park also supports 18 species at risk that regularly occur in the park year-round for breeding or on migration. So Elk Island's not all about bison. It's located 35 kilometers east of Edmonton. It's the sixth oldest national park, and it's one of the smallest national parks. It also protects Aspen Parkland, which is one of the most endangered ecosystems in the world. Globally, less than 10% of its original extent remains intact, and under the IUCN Ecosystem Red List program, it is considered to be critically endangered. And Elk Island is considered one of the core protected areas for Aspen Parkland. Elk Island is also within the Beaver Hills Biosphere, which is this map right here, which was designated in 2016 under the UNESCO Man in the Biosphere program. And it is also a member of the Beaver Hills Dark Sky Preserve, which was established in 2006 and designated by the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada. So we have a lot going for us. And people often ask why it's called Elk Island. And when you look at Google Maps, you can kind of get a good view. It's really because it's an island of protected area within a sea of agricultural and industrial area. So Elk Island, as mentioned, is the only national park in Canada that is completely fenced. And the fence helps Elk Island maintain our recognized healthy status of our bison herds, but it also causes many of our ecological challenges, such as overabundant bison, elk, and moose populations. And the fence functionally splits the park into two blocks that are largely ecologically independent of each other. So the north block contains the park's plains bison herd and is 134 square kilometers, and the south block contains our wood bison herd and is about 60 kilometers. And the two blocks are separated by Highway 16, which is a 4-lane highway. So ungulate populations are isolated within each of these two blocks, and the heavy traffic on Highway 16 restricts the movement of many other animals. It is porous to some service, but it certainly hinders free movement. So these are pictures from Elk Island. So definitely elk, bison can't get through the fence at all. Moose definitely try their hardest, but not many will get over it. But deer certainly go in and out by their own means, so they're not restricted that much by the fence. So yeah, I'll talk to you a little bit about our ecological monitoring programs. So part of Park's mandate is to protect the ecological integrity of Canadian ecosystems. So ecological integrity being a condition that is determined to be characteristic of its natural region and likely to persist, including abiotic components and the composition and abundance of native species and biological communities, rates of change, and supporting processes. So for our ecological monitoring programs, we have different indicators that we have to keep track of. So for our different ecosystems, so for Elk Island, we have our forest, freshwater, and grassland ecosystems. And under each of those, we have different indicators that we monitor in our ecological programs. And we've started to review some of our monitoring programs to make sure that we're doing a good job of measuring and describing the state of the park ecosystem. So recently we're kind of reviewing these, but for now, this is how they stand. So we have our amphibian occupancy monitoring program. It was developed in 2016. So we are in our 8th year of data collection for this program, and it's used as one of our freshwater ecosystem indicators. And it mainly focused on our 2 calling frog species, so the wood frogs and the boreal chorus frogs, as well as recently we've expanded to include western toads, which is also a calling species, and it is a species at risk. And this program is mainly driven by volunteers, actually, as well as some autonomous recording units that we deploy. And we look at basically occupancy of wetlands by these frogs. And it gives us a bit of an idea of naive abundance. But overall, as you can see from the graph, our frog populations are doing very well. We have a lot of wetlands in the park, and so there's been little fluctuation in terms of the occupancy of our wetlands. Next, we have breeding bird surveys. This is one of our longer running programs. We're in our 16th year of data collection for this program. And so we use it to detect trends and monitor avian diversity. It's one of our forest ecosystem indicators. For this, we use exclusively autonomous recording units, we take the recordings and we actually send them out for analysis. So we don't do the analysis in-house. And recently we extended this to our grassland to be one of our grassland indicators as well with grassland birds. But bison tend to knock down our ARU posts. So that's been a bit of a challenge overall. Bison definitely like to knock down anything that we put up in the grasslands. So that's always an ongoing issue. Next, we have our water. We do water quality monitoring, so as one of our freshwater indicators as well, and we're in our 9th year of data collection for this program. Due to the proximity of the surrounding industrial and agricultural lands, our waters are exposed to airborne particulates and contaminants. As a result, our lake ecosystems within Elk Island may be impacted by anthropogenic nutrient enrichment and polluted deposition from long-range global transport, agricultural sources, and the heavy industrial activity nearby. So this is why we like to monitor our lakes. So we monitor our 2 main lakes that are near visitor areas, Astoden Lake and Oster, as well as 6 lakes where we have high ungulate use. Next, we recently developed our species at risk program. We did a species at risk analysis of the park to find out what was hanging out and staying in the area. So we do targeted surveys of barn swallows, mayoted bats, and western toads, as I mentioned. And then we do incidental observations of others. And we're hoping to expand this monitoring program to other species. Road mortalities. So this is also a more recently developed program. So the research is aimed to identify roadkill hotspots, as well as facilitating the development of targeted mitigation responses. So previously, we only conducted roadkill surveys after rainfall events when there is lots of amphibians on the road. But now we're implementing a new project which consists of comprehensive sweeps along the interior park roads and all adjacent exterior range roads as well, so totaling 59 kilometers. And so by expanding this, we're hopefully aiming to discern patterns and factors that may be contributing to wildlife mortality, so that we can start doing targeted interventions to mitigate these hotspots and correlated factors. We also do disease monitoring. A lot of it is incidental observations. So if we find something dead, then we'll send samples for testing to see what caused it. But one of our more targeted programs for disease monitoring is our giant liver fluke monitoring. So our moose population in the north crashed in the early 2000s. We have only a few moose left in the north part of our park. And this was due to giant liver fluke, which highly affects moose. Also in recent years, we've seen elk showing heavy parasite loads. They don't tend to die from liver fluke, but they have been shown to be carrying a lot of it. So we have started monitoring for metacicaria, which is the egg of the liver fluke, which they lay on aquatic vegetation, which is then eaten by moose or elk. So we set up strips in the wetland and we leave them there for a few weeks, and then we retrieve them, and then we look at them under a microscope to see if they've laid any eggs on them. So we're doing a temporal study, so seeing when the highest densities of these metacicaria occur throughout the summer, as well as a spatial study of where in the park they are occurring. And unfortunately, through this study, we saw that they have moved to the south part of the park. So we expect that our moose population in the south will also be affected by this disease. Now, in terms of our active management programs, so by active management, it means like things that we actually have to go in and manage for, often due to human factors that have caused something to go awry. So in addition to the forest and grassland habitats of Elk Island, we also have a highly concentrated and unique system of wetlands due to our kind of knob and kettle terrain of the Beaver Hills. So lots of wetlands mean we have a lot of beavers. And so basically anywhere where a wetland intersects with one of our roads, we have what we call a beaver conflict site. And these can be low maintenance or they can be higher. Definitely in wet years, beavers will build up against our culverts and flood some roads. So we've had some roads and trails get washed away due to beaver activity. So our response to that is we're trying to put in more water level control devices. So that's the middle picture here. So these are devices that we put in, and it kind of tricks the beaver into damming away from the culvert, but the water can actually still flow through the device. So it's controlling the pond level without just having this ongoing battle with the beavers. And we're also trying to adapt our infrastructure to the natural water levels, as well as putting in definitely on trails infrastructure that can fluctuate with the water levels. We also do beaver lodge occupancy surveys throughout the winter months. This we do not every year, but every 2 or 3 years. And we definitely have a high occupancy of beavers. Almost every wetland in the park has a beaver lodge on it. So another one of our bigger active management programs is with invasive alien species. Mainly, we control invasive alien plants, and they are a serious threat to the native species in our park, especially when it concerns forage for our ungulates. So we use an integrated pest management strategy to control these plants. So we do use chemical methods, but we also use mechanical, biological, and cultural methods. So in terms of biological, we're looking into a naturally occurring thistle rust fungus in the park that targets Canada thistle, which is rampant throughout Elk Island and throughout Alberta. And so we're hopefully trying to harness this thistle rust fungus in order to kind of spread it and help it do what it already does, which is affect Canada thistle. And then in terms of cultural methods, we do prescribed burns as well as following up with seeding of native species. So we do drone flights to map distribution of invasive species as well as targeted ground surveys. And we also get volunteers involved with this program. So we have an Adopt a Patch program. And this is where you can adopt a portion of the park for the summer, and you control invasive species on that parcel of the park. We also host 1 or 2 day picking events with the Friends of Elk Island Society, as well as any kind of interested school groups. And we also created the Beaver Hills Biosphere Community of Practice. And this is where people in the Beaver Hills Biosphere from different organizations, so counties or otherwise, and we come together and discuss how we're controlling these species and kind of sharing lessons learned, and we do host events together and try to help each other out with control, because we're all kind of neighboring each other. So, and invasives don't know the borders, so they'll cross over. So we're trying to, create a community that we can control these together. Also this year, we're going to run our first BioBlitz for aquatic invasive species, which we haven't been able to monitor in the past. So trying to see what if any, aquatic invasive species we have out there. Another program that we have is our carnivore coexistence and connectivity program. So in recent years, we've seen an increased number of bears in the area. So we started to begin tracking bear sightings, as well as doing some preemptive aversive conditioning so that they don't hang out on the roadside as much and start getting into kind of conflicts with visitors. And we also started collaring our bears to see where they're going. All the carnivores can go in and out of the fence. So we wanted to try and see where they were going, where they're coming from, mostly as a way to look at what kind of corridors they're using and if we can work together to protect those corridors. So we collect carnivore fecal samples for diet analysis as well as genetic tracking. And again, that's just to look at where do they come from and who they're related to. Fire management. So as I mentioned, we conduct prescribed burning in the park in the spring and fall. And this is to improve the health of our forests and grasslands and to reduce the danger posed by wildfire. It's also one of our goals to expand our grasslands for more forage for our ungulates. And that brings us to bison management, which is one of our biggest active management programs in the park. So as I mentioned, we have 2 different species. The plains bison are north of Highway 16, and we have anywhere between 475 to 700 plains bison. And then wood bison are on the south side, and we usually have between 300 to 500 of those. So some little differences between the two. The plains have more of a rounded hump. They're smaller, they're stockier. They have more prominent chaps, kind of a fuller beard, and are a bit of a fluffier bonnet, and they're slightly lighter in color. And Elk Island's plains bison are one of the most genetically diverse plains bison herds in the world, second only to Yellowstone National Park. And our wood bison, so they have more of a pointed hump. They're about 15 to 20% larger. with a darker hair and a shaggier bonnet. And they also, we don't have very much infrastructure in the South Pilot Park. We only have one trail that goes through there, and that's it. So they are a bit warier of humans because they just don't interact with them as much as the plains bison do. And Elk Island's wood bison are one of the largest TB and brucellosis-free wood bison herds in the world. So bison are considered to be a keystone species. So a keystone species being that they have a disproportionately large effect on their environment relative to their abundance. And the metaphor that's often used is in reference to the wedge-shaped stone at the top of an archway, which locks the other stones in position and enables the arch to bear a building's weight. So without this keystone in the arch, the entire building would collapse. So bison are considered to be ecological and cultural keystone species due to their grazing habits, their feces, which are host to insects and help in nutrient cycling, their hair, which birds use for their nests. Their carcasses are often scavenged by many carnivores in the park, and their wallowing, which is a distinct feature of bison. They create these bare ground areas. And those can fill with water and create little breeding pools for amphibians, for example. And then in terms of cultural keystone, they have huge cultural importance in ceremony and as a food sovereignty and a traditional diet item. So grazing pressure. So on the left, it shows our grass, our different vegetation covers. So only 22 kilometers squared of the park is grassland, so only 14% of the area is available to bison for grazing. And on the right, you can see this is our GPS collar data. So it kind of shows that they really do stick to these kind of grassland grazing areas. And yeah, so most bison will spend most of their time in these grassland areas and in these wetland margins. And so because of this grazing pressure, surplus bison have to be regularly removed in order to prevent overgrazing. So in the winter, we conduct an aerial survey where we do a population count to assess the size of our wood and plains bison herds, as well as the other cervids in the park. And this count data is then used to determine the number of surplus bison that we need to remove that year. And these surplus bison are removed via in terms of, this is listed in priority. So our first priority is transfers to other parks and bison conservation projects. So we've transferred to Grasslands National Park, Banff National Park, Riding Mountain, Waterton Lakes, Rocky Mountain House, Prince Albert. We've also transferred to Alaska. We're doing one of our Alaska transfers this year, actually. They're getting sent out tomorrow, which is amazing. And the American Prairie Reserve. And next, we also transfer to Indigenous communities. About 25% of our surplus bison are transferred to 29 different Indigenous communities. Every year, we do need to send some for disease testing in order to keep our disease-free status. And then much more common in the past, but we have transferred to many zoos and universities. And finally, we do tend to have, especially males, left over that we sell in auction sales to private producers. But that is our lowest priority, so we do try to transfer first and foremost. And over 3,400 bison have been transferred from Elk Island to 115 different locations. So this is just a map of our conservation and Indigenous bison transfers, and this is as of 2022. So there's a few more locations on there even. But it excludes our auction sales to private producers and lethal testing. So a bit about Elk Island's handling and the key differences between how we handle our bison and how you might handle bison on a bison farm, let's say. So we do consider them wild bison. We try to keep interactions with them to a minimum. We only handle each subspecies once every 2 years. And we only handle surplus animals that need to be removed. So animals remaining in the park may have not been handled before. There's a few exceptions, animals that we collar and release back into the park. But otherwise, the animals that remain have never been handled. And yeah, what that means is that as a park staff, I am handling every year, but switching between woods and plains bison. So they're only getting handled every 2 years. And we try to do removals. We design our removals to mimic predation and minimize loss of genetic diversity and to create a natural demographic structure. So that means that we often remove more young calves and yearlings and more very old bison in order to maintain our herd sizes above the genetic MVP and not to remove more than 30%. So the principles of bison handling, so we try to use what we call low stress handling techniques. So we use passive techniques whenever possible. So that might look like leaving a gate open and leaving and hoping that they kind of divide themselves naturally, which they do. It means keeping a calm and relaxed, but a focused attitude when we are handling the animals. And we work bison so that they choose what we want them to do. You can't tell a bison to do what you want them to do. You have to make it seem like it's their idea. And it takes a lot of patience. So we give bison a chance to do what we want them to do. So this is a picture of our plains bison handling facility. We have a handling facility in both the north and south parts of our park. So we do have one for wood bison as well. So how it kind of works, I'll just give a quick rundown. We capture the herd in the pasture areas, and then we sort them into their age and class groups, because when you apply pressure to them, they tend to get a bit more aggressive. So we want them to be in their kind of same size range, so they're not, the little ones aren't getting beat up, for example. And so we'll bring them into the splitting pen and holding pen in smaller groups of up to 10. And then on there we have people who are on the ground working them. And we'll try to split them into 1 or 2 individuals, and they'll go through our back alley, which winds so that it kind of tricks them into thinking that there's always a place to go instead of start at like right angles where they get caught. And it slowly gets smaller until it's in the single chutes where it's a corridor where they can't turn around. And then they go as individuals into the squeeze building. And in the squeeze building, we can kind of hold them in place so that we can put in ear tags or attach a collar if they're getting collared. And bison that are being removed from park, they must be ear tagged. And it also allows us the opportunity to collect samples for health monitoring. So we collect weight, we do pregnancy checks, and then we take blood, hair, and fecal samples. And yeah, as I said, it also allows us to put on GPS collars on some of them. And that's basically how the bison sorting works. Now for opportunities. So these are just a few pictures from our interpretive programs. So there's a few opportunities to volunteer at the park. I mentioned a couple. Our amphibian monitoring program is run a lot by volunteers. Our Adopt a Patch program, we do have some opportunities to volunteer with our carnivore connectivity program as well. And as well through the Beaver Hills Biosphere or through the Friends of Elk Island, they often host events at Elk Island. So I just put the email there for any volunteer opportunities and ways to get involved with the park itself. And then in terms of our interpretive programs, they're all listed on our website, but I just listed kind of our most popular ones. So we do run a Bison backstage program where you get to go into our handling facilities with one of our interpreters. And it's kind of a good way to explain it. It's hard to explain bison handling without being in the handling facilities. So this kind of gives you that opportunity to see that on the ground. I apologize if you can hear my dog in the background, by the way. Another one is Beaver Town. So we talk a bit more about our beavers, so big ecosystem engineers. Pemmican on the prairie, so that looks a bit on traditional ways to use that they used bison meat. And Gateway to the Stars, which I highly recommend. They always host one for staff, and it's always a great time. But it's also open to visitors, and they do a bit on stargazing. And as it is a dark sky preserve, you can really see some cool dark night stargazing. So yeah, that is Elk Island in a nutshell. Are there any questions?
Great talk there, Annelise. Yeah, there's a few questions that popped up into the chat.
Awesome.
I can relay them to you.
That'd be great. Yeah.
Yeah, what is the origin of lead in one of the water bodies? Is it kind of related to lead shot?
Yeah, I can go back maybe to we're looking at water quality. I don't know if I have a full answer to that. Our lead levels are definitely very low, which is good, but it could be just a contaminant, I assume, from like we have some heavy industrial plants near Elk Island or in the Edmonton region. So I assume that dissolved lead would probably come from that.
Okay, thanks. Next question. Is there ground truthing to support the autonomous recording units when you're monitoring the birds? Is there people going out double checking that those birds are actually being identified properly?
We don't do we do have people going out with the recording units. However, we don't necessarily have there's people who come out in birds, so we know that those birds definitely exist within the park. And we are kind of if something comes up that is like a strange bird, we won't we'll double check that. But mostly, we're at this point we're just doing it through the recording units. We're pretty confident in those identifications, but I would say definitely if a bird that was not seen before would come up, that would be something that we would ground truth.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Have the bison ever been in danger from fire?
In danger from fire?
Yeah.
They haven't. No, they actually. It's really cool to do prescribed burns and see the reactions of the bison. They are actually very intrigued. It's almost that they know that like the green little shoots are going to pop up soon. They all hang out around burned areas. But no, we've never had a risk of to the bison through burns. I know in Waterton there was that for sure, but we haven't had that at Elk Island.
That's good.
Mhm.
Are the moose treated for liver fluke?
Currently, they are not, and that's part of this monitoring program is to look at if there are ways that we could provide treatment or do some sort of mitigation measures, especially now that we've found liver fluke in the south part of the park. So yeah, currently we don't do any treatments for moose, but we are looking into options.
Okay.
Yeah.
Beside bears and coyotes, what other carnivores are you having in the park?
Those are definitely our main ones. I would say that wolves and cougars maybe pass through, but they don't tend to stick around. So yeah, it's
Okay.
mainly black bears and coyotes are the ones that will like hang out in the area for longer periods of time. Yeah.
Mhm. You mentioned related to that question that these
Mhm.
carnivores, the bears, for example, are able to move in and out of the park.
Yeah.
So the fencing is not, they're getting around the fencing, or the fencing is not designed to prevent bears from moving in.
No, it's not designed to prevent bears. Bears can climb the fence, but also same way as deers, we have gates throughout the park where there's a larger gap, like underneath the gate, for example, that a deer or a bear or whatever can crawl under. And so those are often kind of points, but bears can also climb the fence
Okay.
pretty
Kind of
easily.
related question in the sense of the carnivores. Have you
Mhm.
looked at the possibility? You mentioned wolves passing through. I was
Mhm.
thinking in terms if you're having an overpopulation of your animals, certainly you're transferring or the bison out of the park. But elk or so, are elk concerned of being overpopulated? And is there some way of maybe introducing wolves into the park to try to manage the elk population?
Yeah, that's definitely an idea that's been tossed around. The issue with reintroducing wolves is being so close to agricultural areas. Um, so, because we can't restrict the wolves in terms of their movement in the park, they would just wander around, and there would be a lot of issues with uh, private landowners who have, cattle nearby or something like that. That could be a risk to them. So, um, it's not something we can do very easily without, guaranteeing those kind of risks to our neighbors. So that's been the issue there. In terms of the elk question, we used to also handle elk and export elk from the park, but we no longer do that, unfortunately, due to CWD, and which I'm not sure it occurs in the park, but just those kind of diseases that are around in the area, and also liver fluke. It's harder to do those transfers when you don't have that disease free status. So that's why we really try to maintain that status in our bison so that we can continue doing transfers readily.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um, Talk about another pressure perhaps on the park. You mentioned all the different beavers you have in the whole park area. Are they putting pressure on the aspen trees, which you indicated were critically endangered?
Um, I wouldn't say they do like take out surrounding aspen trees in the wetlands. I wouldn't say it's to a point that we're worried at all about it. They kind of, yeah. Uh, Beavers are interesting because they fluctuate water levels, and they kind of change the environment around them, but um, it's all kind of natural processes. So no, we're not worried about their impact on the aspen trees.
Okay.
Yeah.
Another possible concern that we're certainly hearing about more and more in Alberta is the impact of the proliferation of wild boars
Mm,
moving into, being released into the province. And now they're going to be a huge problem, I think, in the future.
yeah. Yeah, we do have a wild boar management program that we're developing as well. So we are monitoring for wild boars, and we're trying to trap them if they do happen in the park. And we're working with the Alberta government and Alberta Pork as well to manage that issue. So we're definitely aware and working on that as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think you touched on the wasting disease that are sort of circulating in that the bigger area.
Mhm.
Is that you're still monitoring that within the park?
Chronic wasting disease.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we monitor it, as I said, we're part of our disease monitoring program. We do it like if we find a dead animal, we will send it in for CWD testing. So far, we haven't had any occurrences of it, but that is something that we will send in for testing just to keep tabs on if it's occurring in the park.
Okay. You
Yeah.
mentioned that the park has been expanded a little bit recently.
Mhm.
Are you always looking for opportunities to expand the park?
Yeah, we are definitely partly due to that kind of grazing pressure. We want to increase if we can, we want to increase the area that we can graze the bison and other ungulates on. It's a hard process to expand the park. It took a lot to kind of get the property that we acquired recently. So it is something that we are always looking to do, but it's a bit, easier said than done. Yeah.
Question about actually the transportation of the bison out of the park.
Mhm.
Are you trucking them? Is that the main thing that you do? Or is there other ways
Yeah.
that you can transport them?
We have it's mainly trucking. We have sent bison to other countries, and they have then been put on these like big tanker planes. That's probably the biggest transport that we've put a bison through. But mainly it's trucks that come in. Yeah.
Good. Those are the questions right now. I got one, I guess another one I was just thinking of was you mentioned that the herd started off with a very small number of bison.
Hmm.
So at that point, the diversity in genetics would have been fairly small.
Hmm.
But yet you've managed to have the greatest diversity of a bison herd, at least a captive herd anyways, or a, natural occurring herd.
Hmm.
I was wondering, is there any thought about bringing in bison from other areas to further enhance the diversity of the genetics?
Yeah. So the plains bison is pretty genetically diverse, even though it's from like 30 to 50 individuals. And most plains bison come from that herd, as I mentioned, about 80%. So there's not a lot of other genetics, unfortunately, out there. There are some, but we're not too worried about the plains bison, so we haven't really delved into that yet. But for our wood bison, they came from a very small population, and we're definitely concerned about their genetic diversity. The issue is that, as I mentioned, we're one of the only disease-free, so it's hard to bring in. We can't really bring in other animals without the risk of bringing in disease. However, we are trying to collect semen and eggs from other bison and other herds and wash them, as it were, so that they don't have disease, and then insert them in our bison. We're in the kind of beginnings research stages of that idea, though, so we're just starting to kind of see if it's possible.
Good stuff. One question too was you mentioned earlier on about Highway 16 being
Mhm.
kind of this, I don't know if you call it a barrier or not, between the northern and southern portion of the park. Has there been any thought about connecting those two parts, like animal overpasses or underpasses?
So there are also fences that restrict that movement, but part of keeping them separate is also because they have the separate species. So I'm not really in term. We like to keep the subspecies of wood and plain separate. So in our minds, it's not really an option to connect them, unfortunately, just for that reason, just to keep those subspecies separate.
Okay, yeah, that makes good sense for sure.
Yeah. Hmm.
Um, I don't see any other questions in the chat come at this point. So I guess I would just like to again thank you
Yeah. No.
for coming on to our presentation and letting us know about the Elk Island National Park. Being Calgarians, we tend to drift westward into Banff and places like that, maybe down to Waterton or so. Um, but Elk Island is a fabulous place to visit. We tend to have a lot of bird watchers in our group, and I think
Mhm.
Elk Island is a fabulous place to do some bird watching if you're out there looking for another place to go. So I do thank you for introducing us, or at least some of us anyways, to Elk Island National Park and the beauty and the natural biodiversity that is there. So thanks a lot for zooming in, and I wish you all the best as you move into the spring and summer.
Yeah, thanks so much. Yeah, it's definitely a great place to visit. It's a great place for birding. We have a lot of birds and migratory birds that come to our park. So I encourage you to visit. I encourage you to check it out if you